Welcome to lecture number 30, and here we're going to talk about the lectures from 8 to 14. We're going to revise or the lectures or we're going to look at what we did in these lectures from 8 to 14. Now let's look at the first lecture, lecture number 8, Anthropological Linguistics. This is the first thing we did in this area and in this part of our course. Now, what is anthropological linguistics? Let's look at the definition. The evolution of language in human society and its role in the formation of culture is studied in anthropological linguistics. So here we have that word that is the main focus of this branch, that is the culture. So it's the it's a study of culture, or it's a role of language in culture, or the change of language under the influence of cultural changes, or the impact of culture on language. The evolution of language in a certain culture or in a certain society, human society, and its role in the formation of culture. How the culture has an impact on language, and what are the effects of language on culture. This is another aspect of language, society and culture. The impact of language on society and culture, and how language attained change and language attained a change, or different varieties of language they came up because of different classes of society or because of a certain culture. Now, the structure of language has a social and cultural basis in the same way as other customs, conventions, and codes such as those related to dress and food. Now we have different conventions, different traditions related to dress, related to food, how we take food, and how we have we arrange for example, in our life we have so many things as arrangement of dinners, or we arrange the gatherings where we serve dinner, or we serve lunches, or we serve food, or how we cook food, and what names we have for different foods, and what names we have for different dresses, how we dress up on different occasions. That is the culture. These are traditions basically. So what is the impact of language on traditions, or what is the impact of traditions on language? Now look at this point again, the same way as other customs and conventions. So language has a social and cultural basis. Language comes out of culture and society. Language is formed also because of culture and society. Language also has some part related with society and culture. And just as the customs change, conventions change, the codes change, so in the same way we have a change in the words, we have change in vocabulary, we have change in the tone of language. Each culture organizes its words into its own way, giving names to objects, identifying areas of significance or values, and suppressing other areas. So each culture has its own world, has its own language. It gives names, different names to different objects, identifies the areas of significance, what is important, what is not important. So each culture has its own ways of naming things, own ways of talking, own ways of addressing different occasions. So this is the reason that we have different areas of language and different areas of culture which have an impact on each other. So each culture has its own world, each culture has its own particular language in which they give names to objects or to natural phenomena, and they give names to the dresses. They dress up according to the culture, they dress up on different occasions according to its own norms and social norms and traditions. So that is why they also have their own language, because they have different words. Now, anthropological studies have explored the relation between language and culture. So what is anthropological linguistics, or what are the anthropological studies? What do? They basically tell us the relationship between language and culture. They explore the relationship, the link between language and culture. Language is invented to communicate and express a culture. They invent a language, they bring new names, they bring new words, they bring new vocabulary just to communicate and express a culture. Basically they need to express their culture, they need to communicate about their culture, they need to talk about their culture, so they have their names, particular names. They give names to objects, they give names to the social norms, they give names to the traditions, they give names to the ceremonies. So all these ceremonies, the food, the dress, the culture, that is to be communicated. That is how when the societies, they move across the borders, and people from different cultures, they come together and communicate. That is where you see the amalgamation of cultures, the mixing up of cultures, the mixing up of languages, and that is how the words, the new words are they come up, and new people start learning new vocabulary, people start learning new words, and that is how we come to know about different cultures. So cultures and social norms are communicated through language. So we see new words and change in language, and the new words coming up just because there are changes in cultures. The language begins to determine the way we think and see the world, and language tells us here how we see the world, what is our view about world, and what do we think about the world. So all these things basically are coming through language. Culture is being communicated through language. We are using our own particular language, living in one culture. People have their own language, and they use that language to communicate their particular culture and social norms to other people living in other cultures and societies. Then we talked about the literary stylistics. What is literary stylistics? Definition: the study of style of literary texts, how we study the literary texts and how we use language to analyze literary texts, to talk about their features, to talk about their styles, to talk about how the poets, the fiction writers, the dramatists, they are using different terms. They are also changing the rules sometimes just to create rhythm and music in their poetry or in their writings. So this is the area is literary stylistics, in which we see the role, how the role of language, and how language is being used to express thoughts and views of the writers, literary writers. Taking the view of register, language used in different fields, religious sermons, sports, commentary, law, we can study the styles of literary texts. If we look at register, what is register? We've come across this term so many times. By now I think you are quite familiar with this term, register. Language used in different fields: religious sermons, sports, commentary, law, business, engineering, medicine. Language, specific language being used in these fields. So if we look at that, we can study the styles of literary texts as well, because these different words or these different particular varieties of language are used in writings as well. So here we can also analyze or study the styles of literary texts. We may describe its features at the level of phonology, syntax, lexis. Of course, again, when we study the literary text, we look at every level individually. We look at the sound pattern, we look at the sentences, we look at the words, we look at the change in structure. So we look at every aspect individually in order to find out what different changes the poet or the writer or the has brought. What different words, what different vocabulary, what different changes in structure the poet has used in order to create impact, or in order to put focus, or in order to emphasize certain ideas. So we have to look at every branch, we have to look at every level, like phonology, syntax, lexis. We look at every level individually, and then we analyze the text. We distinguish one text from the other just because of different levels. Studying the text at different levels gives us an opportunity, gives us a chance to compare one text with the other text. So we compare every level, we compare every aspect of both the texts. We appreciate how it achieves some special features and effects through the use of language. It's because of language that the literary writers, they create impact. They achieve a certain special feature. They put focus on certain ideas. They can put emphasis on certain words just through the use of language, just by playing with the language, just by moving the language here and there, just by moving the words and sounds here and there. They do create an impact in their writing, and one writing can be distinguished from the other by just change of these styles and change of the words, change of the syntax. They become quite different because of the flow of words, because of the sounds, because of the rhythm, because of the rhyming scheme. You have different impacts of different texts, and you can compare them, and when you compare them you see the differences. This kind of study is termed as literary stylistics, where you look at the role of language in literature, the role of language to create impact, to give style to different writings. That study is called literary stylistics. The writers try to link what is being said with how it is being said. So they look at the idea and the way that idea is expressed. They look at the thought and the way that thought is expressed. So this is studying of style. This is studying what the writer wants to say in what way. It is through the letter that writers can fully convey their complex ideas and feelings. What is letter here? How it is being said, the idea, the way, the procedure, the words, the way the writer uses the words, the way the writer uses certain linguistic devices, poetic devices or other devices, or how the writer is exploiting them, how the writer is putting them at different places in order to convey an idea. That is basically the way they're trying to make complex ideas easy, and they're trying to put an impact in the writings in order to impress their readers, in order to be known as good writers or great writers. All the writers, they do have a style, they do have their own particular way to express their feelings. Stylistic analysis also helps in better understanding of how metaphor, irony, paradox. Now you see the linguistic devices there, ambiguity, etc. operate in literary texts. They are effects of language and building up of a coherent linguistic structure. So use of language in order to create coherence. They are basically trying to create rhythm, flow, coherence through the use of language, through the use of certain words. How they are using the similes, metaphors, irony, paradox, ambiguity, all these, they operate in literary texts. They are used in literary texts, and many writers, they use them in a way as to develop their own specific style in order to be known by their style. Many writers, they pick up devices. They use those devices in certain way that they are known for their use, they are known for that style. Every writer, novel, a fiction writer, a playwright, a poet has some style, has some particular style where you can even identify the poet, identify the writer. You read a text and you know, well, this is the style of Shakespeare, this is the style of Keats or Shelley's style. You have basically, you have become familiar with these linguistic devices, because the poets, they are so expert in using these linguistic devices that they develop a certain way to use these devices in order to develop a style. So it's again the role of very powerful role of language in order to create impact in the literary texts. Then we talked about a new branch, neurolinguistics, as the word is quite self-explanatory. Neuro, related with brain, or the processes of brain, whatever mental processes are going on in our mind. Neurolinguistics is a study of the neural mechanisms in the human brain that control the comprehension, production and acquisition of language. Now you see these three terms: comprehension, production and acquisition. Comprehension, to understand; production, to generate; acquisition, to take. So what are the human brains doing? They are taking language, they are processing it, they are comprehending it, processing it, and then they are producing language. So whatever is related with brain, whatever language is being generated by brain, whatever processes related to language generation are going on in the human mind, they are studied in neurolinguistics. Neurolinguistics, the link between mind, the link between brain and linguistics. It's a study of neural mechanisms in the human brain that control the comprehension, production and acquisition of language. It is an interdisciplinary field. It's a field which talks about two different fields. It's a combination of two branches, a combination of two disciplines. What are these two disciplines? Psychology and linguistics. So Neurolinguistics draws methodology and theories from the fields such as neuroscience, linguistics, cognitive science, neurobiology, communication disorders, neuropsychology and computer sciences. All these different fields, they have some role to play in neurolinguistics. Now, Carl Wernicke, after whom Wernicke's area is named, proposed that different areas of the brain were specialized for different linguistic tasks. So see, even if it's one area, it's not one area, even if we say that it's a certain part of brain that is responsible for language, even in that part you have different areas related to different aspects of language generation or language production. Carl Wernicke, after whom the Wernicke area is named, it was a linguist, a psychologist, Carl Wernicke, who proposed that different areas of brain were specialized for different linguistic tasks. No, there was another person before him, Broca. Now, Broca's area, it later came out that Broca's area, he also identified an area responsible for language generation, and later on it came out that Broca's area is specialized at handling the motor production of speech, and the Wernicke's area is handling the auditory speech or comprehension. So it's basically again two areas coming in that are present in brain. One is specialized for production, motor production of speech, and the other one is responsible at the auditory speech comprehension. So one is responsible for comprehension, right, and the other is responsible for generation, other is responsible for production. So even inside the brain there are two different areas. One is receiving, one is handling the auditory speech comprehension, and the other one is handling the generation, the other one is handling the production of speech, how you utter the speech. So that is all happening inside the brain, and that is related with neurolinguistics, and this thing has really helped the neuroscientists, the doctors who are handling the patients of speech. This has really helped them in treating those patients, because some of the patients they have speech problems, some patients they have the comprehension problem. So this area, this study has really helped these doctors, this study has really helped the psychologists in identifying what is the actual problem and which area is to be treated and what is wrong with which area, and how this area can be treated in order to help the patient. Summing up the first part of today's lecture, we talked about the anthropological linguistics. What is anthropological linguistics? The evolution of language in human society and its role in the formation of culture. Relationship between culture and linguistics. Literary stylistics, we said the study of style of literary texts. That is the use of language in developing a style, the style of literary texts. And neurolinguistics, it's the study of neural mechanisms in the human brain that control the comprehension, production and acquisition of language. Now, then we moved on to some basic distinctions in linguistics, and we said that there are different schools of thoughts about this. There were different very powerful schools of linguists who were giving different theories about language, and they gave us certain distinctions. Now, the most influential schools, one of the most influential school was the American School of Structural Anthropologists, and led by Leonard Bloomfield, and after World War II it was Noam Chomsky who talked about the different concepts of language. The other one was the European linguists, chiefly among them the Swiss linguist Ferdinand de Saussure, also called father of modern linguistics, had a great contribution to make in the world of linguistics. Now, what is Langue parole distinction here at the top of this slide? This was a concept basically given by Ferdinand de Saussure. An individual makes use of his knowledge, langue, to produce actual sentences, parole. So the langue parole distinction means langue is something and parole is something. Langue is basically the knowledge, the rules, the set of rules that is present in our mind, and the actual sentences that we produce is parole, the actual sentences that can be heard, the finished product or the final shape of our thought, that is parole. And the actual knowledge how to produce that shape is basically langue. Individuals can communicate with each other because they share the same langue. They know the rules, they share the same rules, so they can communicate with each other. Because they know how to communicate, they know how to compose sentences, they know how to name the objects, so they can communicate because they share the same langue. The rules are the same. Individuals produce different sentences based on the same langue. Yes, but the sentences are different. They can communicate, but the individuals, they have different sentences. They utter different sentences because that is the finished product. Because of different abilities. People have different abilities. People have different knowledge, but the set of rules is the same. So people have different capabilities, different abilities, and different competence to produce the sentences. That is why the finished product is different, but the same core is the same. Core is the langue. Core is basically the set of rules, which is the same. Noam Chomsky, an American linguist, made similar distinction between competence and performance. Now, there was another person, Chomsky, a very famous linguist. He had a different thing to say. He made a similar distinction between competence and performance. He said it's almost the same thing. He related these two terms with langue and parole. He said competence, what is competence basically? Native speaker's knowledge of his language, mastery of the system of rules, just like langue. Now, langue is also the system of rules. Langue is the rule, the basic principles. And here he says competence is basically native speakers of knowledge of his language. He knows that he has a knowledge, one concrete knowledge, or he knows about the set of rules. And basically, you can also call it mastery of the system of rules. He knows the system. That is his competence. Whereas performance is production of the actual sentences in use in real life situations. So what is his performance? The way he gives out the final product. What is the final product? That is the performance. So just like langue and parole. Langue, set of rules. Parole, the actual sentence is produced. Here we have competence and performance. Competence, basically native speaker's knowledge of rules and how he uses that knowledge, and what finished product he gives, or what sentences come out, what language is uttered, that is basically performance. So production of the actual sentences in use in real life situation, that is the performance. Speaker's knowledge of the structure of language is a speaker's competence. And the way speaker uses it, that is his linguistic performance. So competence, set of principles. Performance, what a speaker does. Competence is a kind of code, the set of rules. You remember? Langue. Performance, the act of encoding or decoding. How the person encodes, how the person decodes, how the person acquires language, how the person converts it into finished words, or how the person changes and processes those ideas according to the rules, and then utters language, utters words and sentences. That is basically performance. And moreover, it's not easier to study performance through recording by audio and video devices. So it's difficult. Competence and performance idea was difficult, basically had its limitations, had its weaknesses. Like, it's not easier to study performance through recording by audio and video devices. Study of parole gives us the data that makes us understand Langue and competence better. So here is a comparison between two ideas, Ferdinand de Saussa's idea and Noam Chomsky's idea. It says that parole, if you study parole, that makes us understand Langue and competence better. So parole is a better shape rather than the performance. Now why? We remember that there was a debate that basically competence is not the same thing. Competence is not the same with all the individuals. Competence is different. Because it's the knowledge of the set of rules, and the knowledge may vary. With different individuals, the knowledge is different. It varies. So that is why the parole performance again is different. Performance speaks of the competence, and performance can be different. You see, one individual cannot perform the same on all events because it depends on situations sometimes. An individual might be under stress, and under stress he may not perform the same way he performed maybe in the past when he was relaxed. So that is the reason that performance is also different and competence is also different. So it doesn't really give us a very clear idea of what was the actually what level of competence one has, and the performance cannot give a clear indication of the abilities of a person. But when we study parole, it gives us a better idea about the set of rules, about Langue, because parole is just a language or the finished product that is coming out, and that is an indication of the rules of the rules present, rules for generation of that language present. Sign symbol distinction, another distinction that came up. Language is a system of symbolic signs, since they are often very complex associative relationship between the signifiers and the signifieds in language. Signifiers and signifieds operate in the relationship with each other. Now what are these signifiers and signifiers? Signifier, the concept, the way you point at something, and signified basically the concept of the idea, the idea of an object. Signifier, the actual word you're using, and signified, the concept of an object. Now they operate with each other. The way you are naming the things, the way you are the way you give names to the things, that is basically based on a concept. It's based on conventions, and conventionally you give names to objects, and you don't those objects they don't really mean that, those names, they don't really mean the object, but it's only the concept that is related with the object. And these were Saussa's contributions. Saussa exerted two kinds of influence of modern linguistics. First, he provided a general orientation, a sense of the task of linguistics which has seldom been questioned, and secondly, he influenced modern linguistics in specific concepts. Many of the developments of modern linguistics can be described as his concept, and his idea of arbitrary nature of sign, Langue and parole, synchrony, diachrony, syntagmatic and paradigmatic relationships. These are the different distinctions that came from Saussa. Sign, Langue and parole, synchrony, diachrony, syntagmatic, paradigmatic. What is sign? Some words on sign. The whole world is composed of signs, and those signs basically have subdivisions, like the signifier and the signified. Signifier, the actual word you use for an object, and signified, the concept of the object. Not the object, the concept of the object. And on the basis of that concept, you give names, right? And that is why that the words are different. We don't have the same word for an object in all the languages, because it's not the word, it's not the object basically that is important, it's the concept. You give names depending on the concept of that object, the concept that is present in the mind. On the basis of that concept, you give a name to the object. So that word, that object might have a different word in different language. So this concept again was a very important concept of sign language, given by Ferdinand de Saussa. Langue and parole, we already talked about it. Synchrony, diachrony, synchronic talking on the about the language and at the horizontal level, and diachrony talking about the selection of words, talking about the selection of right words, and synchrony taking the choosing the right arrangement. So this is how you have a network of language. On horizontal basis also you have the right arrangement, you make the right arrangement, and on the vertical basis you choose the right word to make sentences. Sauce's contribution, we already talked a lot about it. Sauce's contribution regarding the concept of sign and symbol distinction brought a new revolution, and it enjoys a prime importance in the domain of modern linguistics. Sign and symbol, then we talked in detail about sign and symbol. Language made of signs. Linguistic sign has two parts. That is what is meant by subdivided. The whole world is composed of signs, and every sign has two subdivisions, signifier and signified. That which signifies the word, that is signifier, and that which is signified, the concept of the object, that is signified. Sign is a composite of both. It consists of a relationship between signifier and signified. What is sign? It is a combination of signifier and signified. That is a relationship which gives us the word, which gives us the sign. So sign is basically subdivided into two, signifier and signified. Signified, the actual word for the object, and signified, the concept of the object. That is why we say that language is a system of symbolic signs, since there are often very complex associative relationships between the signifiers and the signified in a language. There are complex relationships. Sometimes you have different words for the same object. So there are very complex relationships, and we say that language is a system of symbolic signs because there are relationships, a complex relationship between the words and the ideas, the words and the concepts. So it's a complex system of symbolic signs. Signifiers and signified operate in their relationship with each other. They operate, we use them in relationship. Signifiers and signified, they have a relationship and they operate in relationship with each other. Sauce's contribution, many of the developments of modern linguistics can be described as his concept. His idea of the arbitrary nature of sign, langue and parole, synchrony, diachrony, a repetition of the contributions, syntagmatic and paradigmatic relationship. We brought this slide again just because we want to stress on Sauce's contribution. That is why he is called the father of modern linguistics, that he gave us many such concepts, many such contributions which justify the word father of modern linguistics, because most of the modern linguistics is called Saucean linguistics, because he really gave us the basic idea about the generation of language, and he gave us the basic ideas how we use language in our life. Again, Sauce's contribution regarding the concepts of sign and symbol distinction brought a new revolution, and it enjoys a prime importance in the domain of modern linguistics. Structure and system distinction. Now, another very important distinction in the structure of language or the system of language. Two intersecting threads build up the fabric of language. Now see the word fabric. Just imagine language is a fabric, and the threads are woven. They are intersecting each other. And, on the horizontal axis we have an arrangement, and again on the vertical axis we have a selection. So what do? We select the right word, and then on the horizontal axis we put it at the right place. We put the sentence in with the right arrangement, and for every thread or every part we select the right kind of word. So language has a duality of structure. At one level we select the elements out of many, like we select the appropriate noun, or we select the appropriate, for example, verb. On the vertical axis we select the right word, and on the horizontal axis we put it at the right place. We put it at the place of subject, and we put a preposition at the place of preposition. We put a verb at the place of verb, and we put the object at the place of object. So this is a kind of crisscross arrangement in which on the vertical axis you have selection of words, and on the horizontal axis you have the arrangement of words. With a limited number of elements, we can construct a large number of combinations, and we saw that we could make millions and millions of sentences just by changing the combination, just by selecting more words in the same category. System is a set of paradigmatic relationships between elements, and structure is a set of syntagmatic relationship between elements at each level in language. At level of sounds, phonological system, and at vowels and consonants, it's phonological structure, determining the combination of vowels and consonants. So here you have two terms, syntagmatic and paradigmatic. Syntagmatic is basically the horizontal arrangement, whereas the paradigmatic is basically the vertical selection, how you select the right words. So at level of sounds, we have phonological system like the vowels and consonants. We look at the right vowels and consonants. And at the phonological structure, what is the phonological structure? We determine the combination of these vowels and consonants. So we have a crisscross arrangement, vertical and horizontal, just to create the fabric of language. At level of sentence formation, how do we form sentence? We have syntactic system, word classes such as nouns, verb, adjectives, and verbs. So we choose the right word in the same category. We select the noun, and if we want to replace it, we select the same noun in the same category. And syntactic structure, that is determining combination of these word classes to enable formation of sounds. So we have the repetition of so many ideas that language is basically just to stress on the point that language is a very complex structure, it's a very complex fabric in which you have arrangements, the right arrangements, in which you have the right selections, in which you have the right operation of rules, and you can't really imagine a structure, imagine the structure of language, or imagine the fabric of language without proper arrangement or without proper selection. Substance and symbols, letters of the alphabet are raw material of the language, and they become meaningful when given a particular shape or order. How can the letters or alphabets become meaningful? By their proper selection and by their proper arrangement. You have to shape the structure, you have to shape the sentence. And how can you shape it? You select the right words and you put them in the right place. At one level we consider only the form or shape, at another we consider the level of meaning. So one level we select only the form, what is the basic shape, and at another level what we do, we look at the meaning as well. We bring meaning into picture and we select the right word which means the same. So a combination of both gives us a meaningful form. When you combine both, you get a meaningful form. Diachronic, synchronic approaches. Diachronic approach related with development of language over different ages, and synchronic approach related with the shape of language at a specific time without considering its shape in past or future. Alright, the two different approaches to study language. Diachronic related with history, synchronic study of language at that very point of time. We discussed these before, right? And here when we are talking about the sources contributions, we are again at the same point where we repeat this idea, the diachronic. We'd like to repeat this very important concept, the study of language, two different approaches to study language, the diachronic approach and the synchronic approach. So diachronic related with history, development of language over the time, the changes that language has had over the period of time, and synchronic, just the study of language at that very point. Generativism, another branch of linguistics. What happens in generativism? See, Noam Chomsky, developed by Noam Chomsky and followers in 1950, came as a reaction to behaviorism, was opposed to the idea of behaviorism. Chomsky asserted the language is free from stimulus control. Language doesn't believe in stimulus. Language is not generated with the help of stimulus. A person to generate language doesn't need any outside stimulus, doesn't need any external stimulus. A person inside has an ability, the basic ability, the basic inside thought is already there, which is inbuilt, which is hereditary, and that ability it helps a human being to generate language, to produce language. Came as a reaction to behaviorism. Chomsky asserted that language is free from stimulus control. Creativity is a human attribute which distinguishes men from machines. Creativity, he called, that ability, that creativity of man to generate language, that is with the human being, that is not with machines. So what differentiates people from machines is their ability, is their creativity, the creative power to generate language. Generativism is an integrated whole in which technical details of formalization are on a par with a number of logically unconnected ideas about language and the philosophy of science. So this is an idea, a whole, integrated whole, in which the technical details of formalization, how forms come and how forms are used, are on a par with a number of logically unconnected ideas about language and the philosophy of science. So here he gives some words which mean that the forms, the use of forms, they are at par with the number of logical, with the unconnected ideas about language and the philosophy of science. So it's basically the definition. You can also say the role of generativism, what is done in generativism, and how the forms are studied, and how the role of forms is studied, and how the unconnected ideas are put into formal shape, they are put into the organized shape. Language is free from stimulus control. Human can produce variety of utterances. The ideas, the assumptions of generativism, the ideas given, or the concepts given by generativism, they are also based on the fact that language is free from a basic assumption, that is, language doesn't need to produce language, to generate language. People don't need stimulus. People don't need external stimulus. Human beings can produce variety of utterances. It is a rule-governed creativity. We produce utterances with a certain grammatical structure. Generativism is different from Bloomfieldian and post-Bloomfieldian structuralism. Some ideas given by structuralists, the Bloomfield and post-Bloomfield, and this is different. They believed in structure. They talked about the structure. They restricted to the actual structure without looking at the inner thought or inner ability. Whereas this idea was different. Generativism was opposed to the structuralism. Generativists said that people have the ability, the inborn ability to generate language. They emphasized on the structural diversity, whereas the generativists were interested in similarity in languages. The behaviorists, they were talking about the differences in language, the diversity in structure, whereas this class, the generativism said that we are basically, they stressed on the similarity of languages. They talked about what is similar in language, because they believe that the basic concept, a basic power is the same. Every human being has some power to generate language. So they talked about the similarities, and that gave them an idea how language is generated, because they believed that the power was there, and these similarities basically tell us that at the back of these languages there's only one thought, and there is only one inborn ability that is creating different languages. Chomsky gives importance to the formal properties of language and to the nature of rules that their description requires. Human language faculties, innate, and species are specific. Another difference, competence and performance. Again, generativists, they said that another difference between the two concepts is competence and performance, and Chomsky, he laid a great stress on the formal properties of language and to the nature of rules that the description requires. Nature of rules. He talked about the rules that were important for describing language, and he talked about the formal properties of language, the similarities that the language is enjoyed. Human language faculty is innate. Faculty, the power to generate language, is the same. It is inbuilt, it is hereditary, right? So the power is the same, but you have different forms of language, and Chomsky was interested in similarities in language just to prove that the actual power is the same, the actual skill to generate language is the same. Generative grammar. What is generative grammar? Again, related to generativism. Generative grammar is a set of rules which, operating upon a finite vocabulary of units, generates a set of finite and infinite strings, which is well formed in language that is characterized by the grammar. So what is generative grammar? It's a set of rules which operating upon finite vocabulary of units. There is finite, limited rules, set of rules, limited vocabulary, and from that human brain is capable to produce millions and billions of structures. So infinite strings, which is, and it is a well formed in language, and that is correct. It is correct. It has a proper grammar, it has a proper structure, and human brain is capable to produce infinite number of structures just from limited vocabulary, just from limited set of rules. The word generate does not relate to any process of sentence production. It doesn't relate to any process of sentence generation production, but basically generate relates to the ability to generate, ability to produce, the inborn ability to produce. A generative grammar is a specification of the grammatical structure of the sentences and that it generates. Grammar of a particular language is a system of rules and principles that link sounds and meanings, and human beings are endowed with a number of special faculties, that is mind. They are endowed with special ability. Now, Chomsky says that there are certain phonological, syntactic and semantic units that are universal. Chomsky says here, he talks about the universal grammar. He says that some of the rules, semantic units, phonological, syntactic, they are universal. Every person has that. Human beings are independent of any external stimuli. They don't talk or they don't utter just because of external stimuli. All human languages are similar in structure, and all human languages make reference to the properties and objects of the physical world, because they are, all the languages, they are talking about the natural phenomena, they are talking about the physical world. So basically they are the same, the underlying system is the same, because all the languages are basically talking about the human world. We are talking about the world of world around human beings, the world, the physical objects. So that is why you can't have differences. Basically all the languages are same if we talk about the deep structures. Grammatical similarities between widely separated and historically unrelated languages are as important as the differences. So grammatical similarities between widely separated and historically unrelated languages, the similarities, they are as important as the differences. Of course, you can't ignore the differences, because that will also tell you about the structure of language or the development of language. So Chomsky stressed that similarities are also important. They are as important as the differences. Now, here we come to the end of this part of the lecture, this part of our revision lectures, and here we talked about the structure, we talked about the forms, we talked about some of the important distinctions. We also talked about the idea of generativism. We also talked about the Ferdinand de Saussure's contribution and Chomsky's contribution, the idea of Langue and parole, and the similar idea of competence and performance. So how human brain has a capability, the innate ability to produce language, the innate ability to create words, to create sentences, and how we understood that it's basically not the external stimulus. As far as the theory coming from Noam Chomsky is concerned, we understood. We have come to a point here that that human brain basically has the ability to generate language. Every human being has some stored grammar, has some stored ability. When a child comes into this world, the child already has some ability to generate language, to acquire language, to comprehend language, and to generate language. It only depends on what atmosphere the child gets, or in which environment the child is living, or we can say that language basically is generated from nature and nurture both. Nature is the inborn ability, which is genetically acquired, and that is a power every human being has to generate language, to acquire language, to take the language inside the brain, process it, understand it, process it, and then finally generate words. So basically that is the inborn ability, or as we say, universal grammar term used by Chomsky. A child doesn't need any external stimulus. It may develop it. The child may develop the words. The child may learn more words. The child may associate words with different things, and the child may start using the words in context. But actually, if we talk about the deep inside ability of the child, we see that every child has some ability to generate language, to understand language. Same goes for the adults. The adults also, adult learners, when a learner starts learning a different language, the learner has some ability to associate different languages with each other, to associate some sounds with some languages, and to ability to compare the language he already knows with the language, with the target language. So how does this happen? This is just because that inside every human being has the ability to understand language, to process language, and to generate language. This is just because he doesn't need any stimulus, because if the stimulus was important, then the language learning process is very effective, just because the person already has the ability to produce language. So we talked about several things here. We talked about the distinctions. We talked about also the structure of language here, the structure, the sign, how the person associates some names, or the names of the objects with the objects, and we talked about the sign concept, that the whole world has signs, is full of signs, and the people, they have the names which are called the signifiers, and they link them with the concept of the objects, that is the signified. So signifier and signified, they operate with the relation to each other, and we get the names of the objects. Likewise, we also talked about the structure of the fabric of language, that it is a crisscross arrangement. You have on the horizontal level, you have the right arrangement of words, but before that, on the vertical level, on the vertical axis, you choose the right kind of word for that very context. So it's a crisscross arrangement, vertical and horizontal intersecting each other, and these threads, when they intersect each other, you get the fine fabric of language, which is a combination of different words and arrangements. So far we have discussed this part, that the structure of language, the ability to generate language. In the coming lecture, we'll be talking about some of the theories that were given about the structure of language and about the generation of language. In the coming lecture, we'll talk about some more lectures, and we'll talk about some of the theories that were given about the language generation, and we'll move this revision phase of the course ahead. So that is the end of this phase of revision, and until the next lecture, it's goodbye.